Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are broadcasting live-ish, online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, letter carriers are picking up non-perishable food items. Today, folks, we have a discussion about some bills in the legislature with a caller from last week. We've got an update on the writer's strike. Adam has a message about the culture of education in the state and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, unfortunately, we are recording. This is a pre-taped episode because I'm getting married today.
Congratulations.
So thank you. So we are not live. This is a pre-tape. We're not going to be able to respond to your comments live, but feel free to send us a voicemail. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send us a text message, and we might respond on the next program. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online. But most importantly, on our website, TVLR.fm, that is updated almost daily with written content, sometimes original written content, or write-ups of some clips, some interviews from the last week's show. Really good stuff there. We're also, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Always good stuff there. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program, if you want to make a one-time donation, or you want to buy our merch, you can head to our website for that as well. To donate, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate, and to buy our merch, you can go to tvlr.fm/store. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, definitely please think about getting your local to sponsor the show. We absolutely could not do our program and everything that goes into it on listener support alone, at least not at this stage. We are on commercial radio stations. That costs money. We do pay our staff now. We pay our staff for the work that they do. Everybody that is paid is currently only paid part-time. But it would be great to be able to have multiple full-time staff, and that can't happen until we get more sponsors. So if you appreciate the show, if you think that what we're doing has some value, and if you'd like to see us grow and you're a member of a union, then definitely think about getting your union to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that. We are always available for questions from yourself on a private phone call, or in front of your general membership, or at a conference of your international or regional union. We have multiple speaking gigs lined up this summer at some at large conferences or training competitions. Really excited about the opportunity to meet and mingle with some other Southern Unionists and talk to them about the work that we're doing here on the Valley Labor Report. So we're always available for opportunities like that.
Absolutely. And if you have an advocacy group, a nonprofit, any kind of organization that's out there that you would consider an allied organization to labor, please consider it as well. It's not just labor unions, but, if you have a union print shop, if you have a media outlet, or like I said, advocacy groups, nonprofits, definitely let us know. We'd be interested in talking with you about sponsorship and how we can work together. And certainly, invite us to your meetings. We're happy to do that. Looking forward to the ones we have scheduled, and looking forward to more of those. And I do want to add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check it out. And as most of you know, we are not necessarily media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in this morning. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we do appreciate you spending some time with us.
Absolutely. So the first thing that we've got on the do list this morning is we had a call last week in overtime. Just a reminder, folks, for if you only listen to us on the radio, you're only getting about half of the show. Less than half now, because we also have a new weekly episode that is totally online only called Shop Talk, dedicated to labor history, education, and training. But on Saturdays, only half of the show is on the radio. We have a full second half of the show that we call Overtime that is online only, where we continue the show. We broaden the scope of the conversation to some more national issues. We maybe get a little bit more political than we do in the main show, and we take callers in both halves of the show. And so we had a caller last week during Overtime who had some comments about some of the bills that are going through the Alabama legislature at the moment, and we thought that it was really a good conversation. We had some good back and forth, and it felt really relevant for our main show's audience, and so we wanted to play that for you here. And so now we are going to play the clip from our phone call with Joe from Decatur. So we've got a caller on the line, and it's Joe from Decatur. How you doing, Joe? Haven't heard from you on the show in a while.
Well, I didn't want to take up all your time, Jacob. Y'all always got something pretty interesting going on. I don't want to butt in, but last week I listened to the show, and of course it was a lot about Workers Memorial Day, and I just jotted me down a few notes, and y'all happened to mention that lack of inspections by OSHA is real slack, and of course there's a reason for that: underfunded, not enough agents, blah. But I just wanted to point out a couple of things that workers get involved in. That's probably detrimental to their own welfare, and that's things like OSHA-sponsored voluntary participation programs, and probably everybody's heard of VPP, where employees form committees, blah, and look at jobs and so forth, so on, and then they get OSHA to come in on a voluntary thing to interview employees, so forth, so on, and see if they qualify for one of their star sites for VPP. Well, basically, what that does in the long run, you get a lot of members and employees at the non-union shops to participate in those things. But what it actually does is when people complain to OSHA enough about their work site, that could be reason for OSHA to come in on a unannounced inspection. Of course, the companies, they can't stand that. But what VPP does is, if you qualify, is guarantee you no surprise inspections since you're a VPP site. If you look at the things that y'all mentioned last week, the TIR, total incidence rate, which is where they have to keep up with injuries and so forth. The TIR will also trigger, if it gets high enough, an inspection. Therefore, companies have found ways to water down what has to be reported. Somebody gets cut, and they go to the medical department or the nurse or whatever, and their first thing is, well, how can we keep this off the books for the TIR? I just wanted to mention that. And then I also wanted to mention that these companies who offer gain sharing programs, profit sharing programs, they also want to tie those to injuries on the job. You can be coasting along there for 3 months and fixing to get your so-called gain sharing check, and all at once, it might look like you're going to get a pretty fair one. And the company decides, okay, this accident right here is one that we're going to make sure we get recorded. And then they start deducting from your gain sharing, which that's a whole nother story. But what it does do is encourages workers not to report accidents for that very reason.
Right.
Now I'm not gonna beat up on that, but wanted to mention a couple of things in the Alabama legislators, and y'all talked about it last week, and the first one was the grocery tax. And I was hoping to actually get on the radio, because the whole thing about the grocery tax, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe most Alabamians think, okay, they're going to take the tax off of groceries. Therefore, in most cities now, the total tax rate is about 10%, 4% of it going to the state. So we're talking about a 4% reduction in the tax rate on groceries. And what they've done in the legislature has passed it in the House, and I don't think it's gone to the full Senate yet. But they make Alabamians think that, hey, this is a real big deal. But if you really look at it, the way it's working right now under their legislation is they're going to reduce it by 0.5% the first year, and then incrementally step it back, I guess, till they reach that 4% if they don't change their mind. But if you really take the 0.5% off of 4%, an individual goes to the grocery store and spends $200 on groceries. If all of them items are taxable, what it really winds up being on a $200 grocery bill is $1.
Right.
Now that's just using pretty simple math, and a dollar ain't much of a tax break. Now, come on, don't you know?
Right.
It's really pathetic to lead the Alabama voters to think, hey, we're fixing to get cut a 10% tax off our groceries, because that's really not what it is. And then, so I think it's pretty deceiving the way they put that out, and most people don't really even look, they don't really even realize that it only equals about $1 on $200.
Yeah, and not only that, but this bill, I think it actually doesn't even the end of this bill is not even the full 4%. It's only up to 2%, right, Adam? That's the max. And then it only, you mentioned, Joe, that it goes 0.5% each year, but it only goes 0.5% each year if the education trust fund revenue increases by no less than 3%. So if the education trust fund revenue does not increase by at least 3% next year, then the 0.5% increase does not even happen. It's stalled until the next year. So yeah, it's very, very small beans.
Convoluted because it's just too hard for them to do common sense right things. Yeah. And so we got to make it difficult and jump through hoops to get somewhere close to something positive. And then it never amounts to, what's promised.
Yeah, but Joe, we are going to be we're going to be pre-taping for May the 13th because of my wedding, and so what I'll do is I'll clip this bit where you're talking about the grocery tax, and we'll put it on for the radio portion next week.
Well, I'd just like for folks to really know what it really amounts to. It ain't like you spend $100 and you save $10 in taxes, because it don't do that at all. I mean, it's far from that. The other couple of things, one other thing I want to mention, and then I'll get off the phone, is the overtime tax. Now, y'all gonna have to correct me on this, but I really, really find it difficult to agree with the overtime tax on your wages not be included in taxes. And the reason I say that, if you want to help the vast majority of Alabama workers, and why ain't they not taxing the first 40 hours, where you're going to actually probably be working 40 hours if you got a full-time job. If you're working less than full-time, you get absolutely no effect from it whatsoever. But my real problem with it is, and I've witnessed this myself and I've lived it myself, people who work a lot of overtime, whether that be voluntary or mandatory, the more overtime, and like I say, I've witnessed this with my own eyes, the more overtime people work, the less employees they got to have in the long run. I mean, really and truly, to me that's a problem. To me that's kind of going backwards when we, even though the unemployment rate is so-called 3.5% now. If times get a little rougher, and these companies want to remain competitive, so forth, then if they start laying off some workers, but at the same time forcing the rest to work overtime, i.e. West Rock down south that was on strike, to me we're going backwards on that, Jacob. I mean,
we really should not be. I mean, we shouldn't be incentivizing people. We shouldn't be incentivizing workers to work more than 40 hours a week, and we certainly shouldn't be incentivizing employers to work their workers more than 40 hours a week. I mean, really, I totally agree that the focus should be on how do we make sure that people are able to get what they need to have a good life within 40 hours, so that they can actually have 8 hours for what they will, right? and 8 hours for rest.
Exactly.
And that's, it's amazing that that's becoming kind of a radical concept again, that people ought to have 8 hours for what they will in the day. And we're going to be talking to to this cast of Toll Puddle here in just a second about some of these fights from 1800s England, where they were fighting for the right to a 16-hour day, and the right to a 12-hour day, and the right to a 10-hour day, right?
Yes.
So yeah. Well, I really appreciate it, Joe. Always good to hear from you, and always really good stuff to say.
let me just mention one more thing, and I'll make it really quick. Both of these tax bills that I'm talking about, I think that was really bipartisan support on both of them.
The overtime tax, the overtime one was actually introduced by a Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely do not understand that. You know, I'm a yellow dog Democrat, period, and always will be. But I certainly don't think it was very well thought out. But I also think that it's just another thing that does get some statewide interest from your average guy who don't pay much attention to the legislator anyway. But it's a way for them to get some attention, like they're really doing something big for us. They promoting this kind of stuff while they're stabbing us in the back on the voting rights. Jacob, I'll let y'all go. Hey, Adam, just keeping with progressive corrective discipline, you was late Thursday, man. So
I know.
You can just consider this an oral reprimand. Yeah, you can just consider this an oral reprimand. But I
appreciate the heads up, Joe, and I'll talk to my rep in the meantime.
You know I'm kidding. But
I know, brother. I appreciate it, man.
All right, talk to y'all later, man.
Have a good one.
Brother. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah, well, that was Joe from Decatur. Is a great guy, really a leader in the labor movement here in North Alabama, former steel worker, retired out of the Cortland, Alabama International Paper Mill. Great, really enjoy, and I really feel honored to have him as somebody that I can call and call a friend and call for advice, and he's definitely a good asset to folks.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
The sign hit the city like a bolt of lightning.
You know the photo. It's iconic. Marches in the streets, holding a simple sign with a simple message.
I am a man.
The I Am Story podcast explores the fight that inspired those words, how a group of sanitation workers in Memphis stood up and made history.
They don't see us as men and women.
Go to IamStory.com or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text message. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. 844-899-8857. As you already know, we are not live today, but you can still leave us a voicemail, send us a text message, and we can respond to it on the next episode of the Valley Labor Report. We appreciate your time this morning.
Absolutely. And we are going to be talking a little bit about HB 209. If you've been listening the last few weeks, you've heard me go off about this bill. I'm very concerned about this bill. I think it's a bad bill. House Bill 209 would criminalize assistance with the absentee voting process. Anything from giving someone a ride to go pick up an application, much less a ballot, would be criminalized, and you could face a Class D felony charge. And, I just think that's so egregious. In this state, and really everywhere across this country, we should be making it easier to vote. We should be reducing the barriers to voting, not making it harder, and certainly not criminalizing people who are helping folks participate in the election and exercise their constitutional right to vote. I've mentioned on the show before that I was elected political coordinator of my local. Most locals have some similar role. Your state fed, your national, international union has, political coordinators, legislative directors, legislative affairs committees. Y'all have voter outreach. Voter outreach is something that our unions do, and that includes absentee voting. A great example would be our trade workers. Let's say you're an iron worker and you're out on a project. You may not be available from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on that particular Tuesday, right? You may be a few hundred miles away from home and therefore need to vote absentee. So this is very directly relevant to the voter outreach that our unions do. But more broadly, it's relevant to working class people in the state of Alabama. Helping our brothers and sisters participate in the election should not risk a felony. And it's so extreme that even groups like the League of Women Voters of Alabama have come out strong in opposition, because the good volunteer work that they do could be criminalized under this legislation. Unfortunately, it's already been passed by the House. It was actually co-sponsored by 42 House Republicans, and it has passed the House, so now it's in the state Senate. So it's, an urgent call to contact your state senators and let them know how you feel about this piece of legislation. And we have some folks today. I actually, earlier this week, put out a statement as a union activist with the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, and was grateful to work with them. They have been fighting hard against this legislation. There are a lot of groups out there who are fighting against this, a lot of activists, from across the spectrum of political beliefs, priorities in their activism. Just a lot of different folks are in this coalition fighting against it because it's a bad piece of legislation. So I was happy to work with the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, and they were happy to send us some folks to actually talk about this legislation and how it would impact them. So really looking forward to this conversation. We actually have some guests here this morning who can talk about this bill. So let's just start there. If y'all don't mind, Maddie, introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there. Y'all both introduce yourself, and then I'll give you each a chance to talk about this bill and how it impacts you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. My name is Maddie Minkoff. I just graduated from the University of Alabama this weekend, actually. And
congratulations.
Yeah, that's me.
Wow.
Thank you so much. I work with Greater Birmingham Ministries and Return My Vote, a lot of felony disenfranchisement and voter restoration stuff that I do. Had the pleasure of working with Mr. Clark before. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome.
Thank you, Maddie. Congratulations on graduation and Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
I'm Jay Gregory Clark with Faith in Action, Alabama. We are a multi-faith organization whose mission is to dismantle systemic racism in order to create pathways of opportunity for every Alabamian. We definitely enjoy our relationship with Greater Birmingham Ministries, with the League of Women Voters, and others of the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, and we agree that House Bill 209 is a horrible, horrible bill.
So let's pick up there. Yeah, why is it so horrible? And talk to us about that. What's your perspective on this bill?
Well, primarily because it's horrible because it criminalizes help. Helping people should never be a crime. And at its core, that's what this is about. It's about making it a crime to help someone participate in the democratic process. And that affects such a large swath of our society, not only trade workers, as you mentioned, but also our disabled veterans, our those who are incarcerated but not convicted and do have the right to vote.
Right.
Those who face physical disabilities like blindness, who find it to be a challenge to make it to the polls, much less get a ballot that's in Braille. I mean, there's a whole group of people that need help participating in our democratic process, and this bill is a direct assault against every one of them.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's so important. There are so many different types of people in our society, and we have to remember that. Not everyone is like us. Your particular situation is not everybody's situation. So if you're listening, you think, well, I've never voted absentee. There are lots of folks out there in our community where that is, the only option, or in a particular election, it is the best option for them. It's a right to participate in the election. And I'm so glad, Mr. Clark, that you brought up these different groups of people who are impacted. There are disparate impacts here, and it's, particularly the most marginalized in our society that this bill is going to impact. And, Maddie, you have direct volunteer work that's going to be impacted by this legislation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Both of you have brought up great points about the very specific groups of people that are impacted, and college students are a huge population of people that are so directly impacted by this. At UA, we don't get election day off. If professors want to hold class, they have to hold class. We have to show up. So absentee voting is super, super important for college students. We have, over half of our population is out of state. The other half, they might be from Mobile or Montgomery, somewhere where you can't get to class and get to your home poll in the same day, realistically. And so I work with UA Vote Everywhere, which is a Andrew Goodman Foundation chapter of a voting organization group on campus. And so much of our work is connecting people with resources with voter absentee voting application ballots. We use a service called TurboVote that helps students get whatever ballot information, application information they need, have them have a plan to vote. All of that work would potentially be criminalized with this bill. Just something as simple as handing out a ballot that you can download and print for free would be criminalized with this bill, which is just ludicrous to even say out loud.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that also stands out to me is that Alabama is a state that features one of the highest incarceration rates in the nation. Our prisons are unconstitutional. We have a mass over-incarceration crisis in this state. And of all things, we want to criminalize more activity. And like y'all said, it's help. You're literally helping people exercise their rights, and that's going to be criminalized. So, I agree. It is ludicrous, and it's wild to even consider that being serious legislation.
I'm interested in, I don't know if any of y'all have done any lobbying with the legislature, but if you have, I'm interested in what the responses have been from supporters of this bill. Because, presumably they are being, they're being approached by advocates of voting rights and saying, these people have these certain needs and these are the things that we are doing to meet them, and it is in no way fraudulent. There's, and that's verifiable. And so do either of y'all have any idea what the supporters of this bill, how they're responding to this kind of stuff?
I did witness the debate on the House floor, and Representative Jamie Keel was the spokesperson for the bill, and his argument as to how people could defend themselves, people who were disabled or people who were more marginalized. His argument was that they could rely on the Voting Rights Act of 1965 if they found themselves in legal trouble, if they found themselves in court, then they could rely on the Voting Rights Act to sort of bail them out.
Oh, how reassuring!
Right. I have to be prosecuted before I get any help here in this situation. But that was given, yeah.
Wow. And so his argument is that, yes, it's potential that even this law contradicts federal law, and that any sane court is going to overturn that because the state can't contradict federal law. And, that's just what you're going to have to hope for.
That was the basic premise of his argument on the House floor. He was challenged by several minority representatives. He was faced with he had to face some sound logic, particularly from Representative Chris England out of Tuscaloosa, who was probably your representative for a while, Maddie, who stated that this is just criminalizing handing over a sheet of paper. I take a sheet of paper and I hand it over to you, and one form is legal and another form is illegal. Like, I can give you a voter registration card, but I can't give you an absentee ballot. I mean, what kind of sense does that make? So his response to that was that we have to protect the democratic process, and that voter fraud is rampant. And so once asked to prove cases of voter fraud in Alabama, he really didn't come up with any evidence. This is Representative Jamie Keel asked for direct evidence of why we need this bill in Alabama, and he did not cite any specific cases outside of one case that happened in his hometown. He said that voter fraud was proven in his hometown, and that race was won basically by a margin of one vote. And if that one vote had not been fraudulently cast, then the outcome would have been different. And I really wanted to jump up and ask him, so is the whole state of Alabama supposed to make a law based off something that happened in your hometown?
Right.
Because because this is ridiculous. But it was a very fragile defense that Representative Keel offered, and honestly, I don't think it can stand under federal scrutiny.
Right. Well, I mean, even the Republican Secretary of State, John Merrill, he is all over the right-wing radio space in Alabama talking about how secure our elections are. And so the idea that, that there is this need to further tighten Alabama's election security is really contradicted by the Republican Secretary of State, who is very confident in his performance as Secretary of State insofar as fraud.
In general, this just be in general. He's very confident in general about himself. But yes, you're exactly right for bringing that up, Jacob. I was going to go there. You're right about that. It can't all be true, right?
Right.
Did you have anything else, Jacob?
No.
Okay.
That was
I just wanted to give y'all a final chance if you had any final words about this legislation that y'all wanted to share with us.
I just wanted to add that, Alabama's absentee voting system is already the most complicated in the country. Like, it just is. And so adding just like another layer of difficulty and confusion, and nobody knows exactly how much help is criminalized. Like, if handing you the application is criminalized, if I show you the link where you can print it yourself, is that criminalized? Like, what? It just is adding so much confusion and fear into a system that's already way more complicated than it has to be. It just doesn't make sense.
That's a really great point.
Absolutely.
Mr. Clark, do you have anything to finish this up?
Well, I think that was a great summary from Maddie. Also, this bill affects the fundability, if you will, of organizations like Greater Birmingham Ministries and Faith in Action Alabama, the League of Women Voters, and others who help people to vote absentee or otherwise to register to vote. We now have funders that can't fund certain activities if they are criminalized. And I think that that's at the heart of what this bill is about, because let's be honest, there are not very many voter fraud police waiting to watch somebody hand over an absentee ballot, right?
Right.
But what it really gets at is the fact that no longer can people receive grant monies or assistance to go into jails or to go onto college campuses and ensure that the voices of the most marginalized people in our society are heard. And I think that is wickedness at a whole nother level.
Oh, I think you just spoke it right there. I think that's exactly what this is about, because let's be honest, these elections aren't even competitive. The Republicans they won by like 20 points minimum in almost every election in November 2022 in the state of Alabama. So I don't think, it's the classic Alabama legislature to have an imaginary problem that they've created out of thin air. And they propose solutions to this imaginary problem that are going to create very real consequences for real people in this state. And it's a total shame. But I really appreciate the work that both of y'all are doing in the community. I appreciate both of what y'all are doing to help people participate in the elections. And thank you so much for your time today to share this with us. And thanks for fighting against this bad bill.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
Yeah, well, that was a great conversation. Really important stuff there.
Absolutely.
So, up next we have, the writer's strike is still going on. And I think the anticipation is that it's going to be going on for some time, right? That there's a backlog of scripts that have been written already. And so I think the assumption is that production is going to continue with the scripts that are written, and that there will be that things are going to continue to move for a while until they run out of scripts, at which point then the studios are really going to start feeling the pinch. And also at which point, if I am recalling correctly, the actors' contracts are expiring in 8 weeks, and they are in the middle of contract negotiations right now. So there's some speculation about, as well as the directors. I think the directors and the actors, their contracts expire on the same time. Maybe we can get a post-recording fact check on that. I don't know, but but I do know that those contract negotiations are expiring soon, and there's some talk of potentially in Hollywood the writers and the directors and the actors all being on strike all at once. So the anticipation is that this is going to last for a while, but we are now firmly in week 2, and so Adam, what has been and you're Adam is in the stagehands union for folks that don't know, and so in a lot of areas the stagehands union works very closely with the writers and the actors and the directors, and so what are some of the big updates here in week 2 of the writer strike, and how has IATSE been responding?
Yeah, so I think there's been a lot of solidarity on display in the picket lines, and you've seen a lot of IATSE members, particularly in New York and Hollywood, out there on the picket lines with our union kin and the WGA. And, I think that's really important. We're expressing our solidarity with the writers, who are our brothers and sisters in the entertainment industry. And I think it's worth noting that the United States, we talk about how, the U.S. doesn't make as much as we used to, right? We're not the manufacturing powerhouse we used to be. But if there's one thing we make, it's entertainment. If there's one global export in which, the United States is powerful, it's entertainment. The entertainment industry is huge in this country, and it is a very, very valuable industry. So yeah, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, we support the Writers Guild of America, West and East, in their collective fight to win a fair contract from the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, AMPTP. And, we support their fight on behalf of the talented workers they represent. These are behind-the-scenes workers. The motion picture and television industry thrives on the creativity, the skill, and the labor and the time of every one of these workers involved. And the writers' contributions are an important part of the success of films and TV shows and all the other media in which a handful profit handsomely. And that also provides important jobs for folks like IATSE members. So as an IATSE member, I think a fair contract for WGA members is better, not just for them, but for our members and union members more broadly. The AMPTP is an ensemble of media mega corporations, collectively worth trillions of dollars. Standing with the writers in their struggle to win their contract is not only the right thing to do, but it's also an opportunity for IATSE members to build momentum as we look ahead to our own basic and area standards negotiations with the industry in 2024. So that is coming up. And, this make no mistake here, the AMPTP is responsible for this strike. The last 2 major film and TV negotiations that the AMPTP engaged in were 1, a narrowly avoided IATSE strike, and now 2, a writer's strike. It's beyond the pale that AMPTP is engaged in this level of resistance at a time when the corporations who control the industry are seeing sky-high profits and executive pay. IATSE members are joining union members across the country on the WGA picket lines and standing in solidarity with our union kin as they fight for the contract they deserve. And we spoke last week about this issue. And I just wanted to also mention that unlike a lot of labor struggles, this is busting through to the mainstream media. I found an article from the Today Show, of all places.
Oh, wow.
They put out an article on May 10th, which actually was not bad, from Lauren Lowe. Not a bad job there. You never really know when mainstream media starts covering labor struggles, how they're going to do. But she did a pretty good job sort of laying the context there. And just for some of that context, she wrote, "It's been a dramatic week in Hollywood, to say the least. On May 2nd, the Writers Guild of America, WGA, an alliance of 2 labor unions representing over 11,000 film, television, news, radio, and online writers, went on strike demanding higher pay and a stable pay structure, as well as fair deals and contracts and provisions about artificial intelligence, per a list of WGA proposals. And we talked last week about more of those proposals in depth. And the Guild, when announcing the strike, called this moment an existential crisis for writers. And it's worth noting that about 98% of their members voted to go on strike. We have reached this moment today not of our own choosing, but because the company's assault on writer income and working conditions have pushed us to an existential brink, WGA Negotiating Committee co-chair Chris Kaiser said on the organization's website. For the past week, writers have been picketing the headquarters of major studios, including Netflix, Amazon, Warner Brothers, Universal Studios, and others. Protesters have been brandishing signs demanding higher wages and targeting studio executives with tongue-in-cheek messages like, "Give up just one yacht," and "Pay your writers or we'll spoil secession." When the strike entered its second week, production has halted on several major TV shows. Saturday Night Live went dark on May 6th. The late-night shows, including The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, also stopped taping live episodes. They're airing reruns. So that's a little bit, in terms of the context. We talked last week a little bit more about why they're going on strike. The residuals on streaming is a major issue. The new lengths of gigs is also a major issue. Jobs that used to be 6 to 9 month jobs are now, 4 to 6 week jobs. And you're having to string together a lot more gigs just to make a living. And that's just, so we've seen the gig workerification. I know that's not much of a word, but you hear what I'm saying here. The gig worker has been implemented in industry after industry, to the point where we see the gig worker lifestyle as kind of what's being presented for folks of all sorts of industries and folks of all kind of backgrounds and professions. And we're seeing it here with the writers. It's long been a trend in teaching, the idea of having teachers become more like gig workers. It's, something that we're going to have to deal with, and AI being a factor as well. And, to the extent that capital controls AI, capital wants lower labor cost. Capital will replace labor with AI when it can and when it's profitable, unless we have some stake in this, unless we have some ownership in the AI property, or unless we have strong bargaining power to really withstand this challenge. So there's a lot of issues going on here with this writer strike, and as I said earlier, just as an IATSE member and as a union activist, I definitely extend my love and solidarity to the writers, wishing them much success on this strike. It's a shame that it took a strike. But yeah, definitely sending my support as they fight for the fair contract that they deserve.
Absolutely. That's great to hear, and we are going to continue watching that. Something else on our radar is OSHA has a new initiative about emphasis on reducing workplace falls, which are surprisingly, and I didn't know this, falls are the leading cause of workplace fatalities. I
was not aware of that either.
Yeah.
It makes sense, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, it may seem kind of silly to think about a federal agency trying to, launch a nationwide initiative to reduce falls in the workplace. But, if it's killing people, that's something that we ought to look at and try to combat. And so, Adam, what are they? What does the initiative entail? What are they doing?
So, yeah, the U.S. Department of Labor announced its OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has begun a national emphasis program to prevent falls, which, as Jacob said, is the leading cause of fatal workplace injuries, and the violation the agency cites most frequently in construction industry inspections. The emphasis program will focus on reducing fall-related injuries and fatalities for people working at heights in all industries. And I'm going to pause there to say, as someone who works in an industry where height is involved, yes, it's important. It can be very dangerous. So whether you are a IATSE rigger up in the balcony somewhere, or you're a roofer, you're working in construction, you're an iron worker, whatever the situation may be, when you're working around heights, it can be very, very dangerous. And so that's why safety is so important. And that's why our unions fight so hard for safety in the workplace. But back to OSHA, the targeted enforcement program is based on historical Bureau of Labor Statistics data and OSHA enforcement history. BLS data shows that of the 5,190 fatal workplace injuries in 2021, 680 were associated with falls from elevations, about 13% of all the deaths. The National Emphasis Program aligns all of OSHA's fall protection resources to combat one of the most preventable and significant causes of workplace fatalities, said Assistant Secretary for OSHA Doug Parker. We're launching this program in concert with the 10th Annual National Safety Stand Down to prevent falls in construction and the industry's Safety Week. Working together, OSHA and employers in all industries can make lasting changes to improve worker safety and save lives. The program establishes guidance for locating and inspecting fall hazards and allows OSHA-compliant safety and health officers to open inspections whenever they observe someone working at heights. An outreach component of the program will focus on educating employers about effective ways to keep their workers safe. If a compliance officer determines an inspection is not necessary after entering a work site and observing work activities, they will provide outreach on fall protection and leave the site. So, definitely want to see more emphasis on worker safety and safety in the workplace. We talked at length about that on in honor of Workers Memorial Day recently, about the deaths and injuries and illnesses on the job. Still, way too many people are hurt at the job. Too many people die on the job. So, anytime I see OSHA trying to step it up, that's always a sign, a positive sign. We need much more OSHA inspection. We need much more compliance from employers, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And with that, folks, we're going to go ahead and go into our second break. We will be right back, and Adam is going to wrap up the show with a message about the culture of education in the state of Alabama. So you're not going to want to miss that. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Ironworkers Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need ironworkers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383
888-866-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net.
And we're going right into the intro.
Tell them that you heard about
right?
them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you.
Sinyard Law. And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case.
Sinyard Law. A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Do you work in an auto manufacturing plant? Are you tired of taking pride in your work without getting the respect you deserve? Consider joining the fight to unionize. Auto workers across the industry are coming together because with a union, we can negotiate for the pay, benefits, and security that we deserve and can help sustain our families. In union plants, workers bargain for long-term wage increases, competitive bonuses, and more affordable benefits. You can join the growing wave of organizing today. Find out more and contact us at Uniting Auto Workers on Facebook or contact UAW Region 8 in Lebanon, Tennessee by going to www.uawregion8.net. That's www.uawregion8.net. A better future is ours.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Adam Keller, and my co-host is Jacob Morrison. If you have anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text. Phone number is 844-899-TVLR. Don't forget, this is a pre-taped episode today, Saturday, May 13th. So you can't join us live on the air, but you are welcome to leave us a voicemail. We can play it next week. You can send us a text, and we can check that and talk about it next week. Always love the participation. Appreciate that very much. And for those of you who don't know, we air live on WVNN, which is the right-wing talk radio station in Huntsville, Athens, every Saturday from 9:30 to 11, with our overtime after 11 o'clock airing online on YouTube and Facebook. We got our start on WVNN, birthplace of Sean Hannity and home to all sorts of reactionary propaganda that we find objectionable. But we think it's important to get a different perspective out there to multiple audiences. We're happy that a portion of the show is replayed during the week on WZZA, the historic black radio station in Northwest Alabama, and on WHIV, a community radio station in New Orleans. We release the full episode on Spotify, Apple, and the various podcasting apps, so please subscribe to us on your app of choice and give us a good review. And throughout the week, clips of the show are released as standalone videos on YouTube and even in some cases TikTok. So if there's a specific segment or interview you want to find, we try to make it easy for you. We have our, an extensive back catalog at this point with some really fantastic interviews that you may have missed, especially if you just started listening, in the past few months, or maybe, this is your first episode. We have an extensive back catalog, and I am working on improving that back catalog in terms of the YouTube playlist. So that is a work in progress, but, we do have a couple playlists out there, specifically the Unions 101. I really recommend you check that out if you are new to labor unions and you're trying to learn more. Some great segments there and great interviews there. But also we've got some labor history, we've got public education conversations, we've got bosses behaving badly segments, and so we'll be working on improving that YouTube playlist back catalog. But just do us a favor, hit subscribe, hit like. We're trying to make it easy for you. We appreciate all of the support on social media and the various platforms. That engagement that you can offer really does go a long way. It's a free, easy way to help us if you like and subscribe, because all of our content is free. So special thanks to all of you who donate, all of you who comment and call in, all of you who have liked us, shared us, reviewed us. It really does help, and like I said, that's a great way to support the program. If you believe it's important to have our own media of, by, and for the Southern working class, please consider supporting us however you can, and please share with your coworkers, friends, family, and neighbors. We know there's a lot of good causes to support, and our audience are, working folks with limited incomes. So if you do find value in our project and you're willing to chip in a couple bucks, it really would mean a lot. We've got some great stuff planned as we grow the project, and we can't do it without you. So let's talk a little bit about education. There's a lot going on in education when it comes to Alabama specifically, but public education is under attack across the country. It has been for quite some time, but some of these attacks have really ramped up in the last couple years. The pandemic really set off a fresh wave of attacks, and we've seen it continue since with culture war, pushes of the culture war, pushes of vouchers and privatization schemes. We've seen politicians like Ron DeSantis really trying to make a name for themselves by bashing teachers and by bashing public schools and by attacking public education in general. So a lot happening here as well. Wednesday, May 10th, was the Education Policy Committee hearing on the Price Act as well as the Charter School Bill. So the Price Act is the Education Savings Account Bill, which is another name for a voucher program. So there was a lot of school choice, quote unquote, conversation happening Wednesday in the legislature, and we'll be talking more about that next week. But in the meantime, I wanted to highlight an article I found. So NEA Today is the magazine of the National Education Association, which of course is the country's largest teachers union. And of course that comes with the asterisk that many of NEA's state affiliates, including in Alabama, actually reject the idea of unionism and prefer to operate as and be labeled as, quote unquote, professional associations or professional organizations. Nonetheless, Jacob and I saw this article from, a month or two ago that was quite helpful, I felt. And it's called The Culture War's Impact on Public Schools. Political attacks that target inclusive curricula and divide communities are undermining public education and its role in educating for our democracy. A new national survey details the impact of pervasive and growing political conflicts on schools. Almost half of schools reported challenges to teaching about issues of race and racism and policies and practices related to LGBTQ student rights. 1/3 reported attempts to limit student access to books in the school library and social and emotional learning. The The conflicts often result from intentional and organized efforts that have targeted purple or more politically diverse communities. Manufactured outrages designed to divide educators and parents for political gain didn't really work in 2022, a recent NEA survey found. Instead, midterm voters were focused on school safety, the educator shortage, book bans, and other challenges. Unfortunately, as the 2024 campaign season begins to take shape, the culture war on public schools doesn't show many signs of abating. The stakes couldn't be higher, says John Rogers, professor at the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA and director of UCLA's Institute for Democracy, Education, and Access. Rogers believes we are at an existential moment for public education and a diverse democracy. Since 2017, Rogers and his colleagues have been tracking how the increasingly divisive and polarizing political climate has sown discord in communities, targeted inclusive curricula, and aimed to undermine overall confidence in public education. Their latest report, Educating for a Diverse Democracy, The Chilling Role of Political Conflict in Blue, Purple, and Red Communities, finds that in the midst of political conflicts, students have limited opportunities to engage in learning and respectful dialogue on controversial topics, and it's become harder to address rampant misinformation. The highly charged environment has also led to marked declines in support for teaching about race, racism, and racial and ethnic diversity. Meanwhile, harassment of LGBTQ youth has increased. In his research, Rogers surveyed public school principals and found almost half, 45% of principals, said the amount of community-level conflict, centered largely around opposition to inclusive curricula, during the 2021-22 school year was more or much more than prior to the pandemic. Only 3% said it was less. Rogers recently spoke with NEA Today about how polarization and coordinated attacks are preventing many educators from teaching controversial issues or about our nation's full history. Quote, "These attacks are undermining the role public schools play in educating for our democracy," according to Rogers. So check out the full article for the interview with Professor Rogers. I highly recommend that. You know, what's clear to me is that the privatization of public education is inextricably linked to reactionary and segregationist ideology. There's a reason the push for more vouchers, more charters, more attacks on teachers almost always coincide with the so-called culture war fights over issues of curriculum and diversity. They are two sides to the same coin. Whether it comes from the far-right folks like Betsy DeVos or the neoliberals like Bill Gates, ultimately these agendas are intertwined. It is the sabotage of public schools, institutions which are critical to the working class communities that they serve. So I want to recommend folks check out our conversation from a few months back with Dr. Lois Weiner, where we talked about this very issue in the multi-front war on public education and the ways in which public education's attacks from the culture war perspective really is tied to broader efforts of privatization. It's part and parcel of the same fight. And by and large, it's coming from the same people. It's coming from the same funding sources. It's coming from the same elite class of billionaires who have funded an astroturfed effort to attack public schools. And you can find these people in Montgomery. You can find them in state capitals all over the country. You can even find them, in some cases, at school board meetings. And we're seeing more and more astroturfed organizations in the school board level. We had right-wing crazies running for school board in Huntsville back in August. There are groups like Moms for Liberty that are out there causing all kinds of problems. And, just a couple weeks ago, the governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, fired the head of the pre-K department, Dr. Barbara Cooper, who was a respected educator. She was fired for being too woke, quote unquote woke. Literally. Just really wild stuff. And like I said, it's no coincidence that, this rhetoric around wokeness which, oh my God, doesn't that just annoy you just to hear people even use that term like that these days? It's just the right wing really has just run that into the ground, and almost anything they don't like is now called woke. Even basic levels of diversity and appreciation of diversity is now considered too woke by many Republicans. And so they're doing this right at the same time they're pushing for money for private schools, money for religious schools. They want public school funding to supposedly follow the child and follow the family. Of course, nowhere else do we have that philosophy when it comes to government funding, right? You pay taxes on roads. You don't get to have, a road allotment. You don't have to, you pay taxes for levels of public services, right? And I don't get to pick and choose whether or not I want to pay taxes to the firefighters or to the police officers, right? Police officers often do things I find highly objectionable, like kill people. Doesn't change the fact that my tax dollars go there. I don't get a home security voucher, right, just because I'm displeased with those services. No one's going to give me $7,000 to install my own home security system to protect myself if I'm not happy with the performance of the police force. It's just not going to happen that way. All right? We don't think about government funding in any other arena in the way that these people are pushing it for vouchers, that the funding, the tax dollars should follow the child. And of course, this is a way to weaken public schools. It is a sabotage, because the more they get their way, the more they siphon funds from public education, the weaker the public schools are, the bigger the class sizes are, the higher the teacher turnover is, the higher the shortage among the staffage shortage among support staff, right? The special education aides, the cafeteria workers, the custodians, all the people who support the school system actually functioning day to day. They push this privatization to put more public dollars into private hands. And the more they do that, the weaker our public schools become. And of course, the weaker they become, the more the demand increases for such alternatives like vouchers and charters. It's a vicious cycle. And we'll see. We'll see what happens in Alabama. But unfortunately, there has not been a broad movement to fight back against this stuff. Not that I'm seeing. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And we do plan to talk more about that next week. And I hope to pull some clips from the committee hearings so you can hear for yourself some of the garbage that's being discussed down in Montgomery. And on the subject of garbage being proposed in Montgomery, that leads me to our next segment about the so-called Divisive Concepts Bill, which is being rammed through the Alabama legislature. Rebecca Griesbach put out a great article back in April which explored the legislation, its background, and the initial reactions. And really highly recommend this article by Rebecca Griesbach. It's good stuff. She talks about the background and kind of where this comes from. She talked about some of the debates happening in the legislature. For example, Representative Prince Chestnut, who is a Democrat from Selma, he said, quote, "This is a slap in the face to every decent, hardworking black Alabamian that's in this room, that's out of this room, and to the children and the unborn. It's divisive that not a single white person on this committee is going to vote against this bill. That's divisive." So this bill proposed by Representative Ed Oliver of Dadeville, prohibits public schools, colleges, and other state agencies from promoting certain quote-unquote divisive topics. And I encourage you to read the bill for yourself. It's not terribly long. It's just a few pages. I find it just ridiculously stupid. Some of it's pretty straightforward. You're not allowed to teach that a certain race is superior to another race. Okay, duh. That's true. We should not do that. But then it goes on to to broaden the scope to essentially ban almost anything that might remotely imply that there is such a thing as implicit bias, that people have bias. There's ways in which this could possibly threaten the authentic teaching of history, because it's one of those bills where it really depends on the interpretation. And of course, it's responding to a whole lot of nothing. There is no, crisis in our classrooms about divisive concepts that are being taught and dividing our students. I'm sure they can find some anecdotes of a few teachers who maybe used a poor choice of words, or, I'll even grant you can find some examples of probably some pretty weird stuff out there. I used to represent public school employees, about 1,500 of them. They were not all perfect angels. Sometimes they made mistakes. That's life. But yeah, this bill is just, it's ridiculous. And I agree with Representative Chestnut. It's a slap in the face to everybody, frankly, because it's an assault on intellectual freedom. It's an assault on educators, with an implication that, they would do harm to their children. It's just, it's garbage made up. It's made up garbage from right-wing media that is teaching people that there is so-called critical race theory that's happening all over. And it's threatening white people. It's threatening, white people might be made to feel guilty by teachers. And it's just absurd. It really is absurd. And it's an attack on diversity. It's an attack on history, and really it's an attack on just basic decency, because we should be able to have authentic conversations with young people about life, and about that includes race. That includes the way race plays a role in our country, the way race plays a role in our history, and that's just reality, right? I shouldn't risk trouble with the law by acknowledging the truth. It just shouldn't happen. So definitely stay tuned to this divisive concepts bill. And like I said, I really recommend checking out Rebecca Griesbach's article. And if you get a chance, just check out the bill itself. And just for the record, James Lomax, South Huntsville's representative, the new young representative in South Huntsville, he is one of the co-sponsors of this bill. So I'm not sure if he thinks Grissom High School is teaching divisive concepts, or if he was exposed to such divisive concepts as a student. I can tell you, as a former Alabama educator and as a Alabama public school student, I certainly encountered much more conservative and right-wing politics among educators than I did the alternative, right? I was much more likely to hear fundamentalist Christianity or conservative Republican politics coming from people in education than I was like left-wing politics or anything remotely resembling critical race theory. That was my experience. Maybe other people have different experiences, but I just, again, Alabama legislature loves to have imaginary problems and come up with so-called solutions to those problems that cause real issues for real people in the state. So as we wrap up, I want to remind folks that we also air on Unclaimed Mysteries Radio, which is a Huntsville-based internet radio station. 1970s FM underground radio style, eclectic local, regional music, experimental sounds, noisy and otherwise, Huntsville, Alabama arts, culture, politics, audio theater, comedy. You can listen on Live 365, search Unclaimed Mysteries Radio. And as we're wrapping up here on the radio, we do have a few reminders and some events to share. Jacob has an article within these times called An Explosion, Layoffs, and the End of Paper in J. Check out some of the articles that we've got on our website, TVLR.fm. I wrote a series on Alabama political engagement, including some discussion of the Alabama Democratic Party, which is generating some conversation. As they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings. Highly recommend you check those out. Go to labornotes.org. The Alabama International Fringe Festival is a 3-day event taking place on May 12th, 13th, and 14th in the River region of Alabama, centered in Montgomery. That includes a performance of Toll Puddle the Musical, which is a musical about Union struggles in 1800s England. Check out our interview with the director and one of the lead actors that we did last week. I also wanted to mention that this Sunday on May 14th, there's a protest happening in Huntsville at Big Spring Park at 3 p.m. against the so-called Don't Say Gay bill and the drag ban bills. So the LGBTQ community is calling for allies to attend this demonstration at the Big Spring Park at 3 p.m. Don't forget our new weekly series called Shop Talk, airing online Thursday mornings. Shop Talk is dedicated to labor education, history, and training. Check out the live stream Thursday mornings at 9:30 a.m. Central Time, or the podcast a few days later. And again, if you're not on our email list at tvlr.fm, definitely sign up for that so you can stay up to date on our work. And our work is to highlight the labor movement in the Tennessee Valley and across the South. You can leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. You can buy a hat or a shirt or just donate at tvlr.fm. Definitely check out those new shirts. We just got the shipment in. We've got about 20 or so for sale, so it is a limited edition. Get your hands on one of those. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the Valley Labor Report. We're going to be heading into overtime, where we're going to talk all sorts of labor stories, including a discussion about right to work. So thanks again for tuning in. We appreciate your time. All power to the workers.
Welcome back, folks. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio show. We are now in overtime and gotten rid of the FCC censors. We are here on in the second half of the program, where we're online only. We've got some good stuff for you today. We're going to have a conversation about right to work. Adam is going to be talking to you about some news from the Department of Justice, from Louisville, Kentucky, and the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So we'll go ahead and just jump into it. With this conversation about right to work. You know, we have segments every now and then that for some may be repetitive and elementary, but for others, other people are just coming into this stuff as a beginner, and they haven't heard these conversations, or maybe they haven't heard them in the same way, and so it's worth coming back to some of these conversations every now and then, and one of those conversations is about right to work, because it really is one of those things that was named so well, even though it is not at all descriptive of what it does. And so, you know, Adam, talk to us about right to work. I mean, you know, in what ways is it misleading? In what ways is the name of the policy misleading? And what does it actually do?
Yeah, so, I mean, right to work is a misleading term. It does not actually have anything to do with a person's right to a job. You know, right to work sounds pretty good. It almost sounds like a job guarantee, right? If I have a right to work, I assume y'all gonna put me to work somewhere, right? That's what I would assume, but of course, that's not what right to work means. Right to work refers to state laws that prohibit unions from receiving quote-unquote fair share fees from workers who are represented by the union and covered by a collective bargaining agreement, but not a member of the union. Okay, so this clarify this. In fair share states, so not right-to-work states, in fair share states, unions and employers can negotiate rules that require all workers covered by a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement, to either pay union dues if they want to be a member of the union, or if they don't want to be a member, to pay a fair share fee. And the reason they do that is because it costs. If you're still covered by the contract and you're still represented by the union, you don't have to join, but you're still getting those benefits, right? It's not the same as being a member, but you're still getting some representation and coverage from the contract. You benefit from the work of the union. It is only fair to pay a fair share. At least it's the way I see it. It seems pretty reasonable so that you don't have people who are taking a free ride on the union's dime. And unfortunately, that's what we have in right-to-work states. That's what they like here in right-to-work states. The politicians think that workers should get to take a free ride on the union's hard work, that you should be able to receive representation from the union, that you should benefit from a collective bargaining agreement contract from the union, but you shouldn't have to compensate the union in exchange in any way or form. So in right-to-work states, the fair share agreements are illegal. Okay, that's what right-to-work ultimately means. It means that fair share agreements are illegal. And just, again, to emphasize, the fair share agreements are negotiated between employers and unions. Okay, it's not the government that steps in and says, oh, you must pay a fair share fee. No, it's something that is negotiated in a contract. Unions and employers have give and take in the contract negotiation process, and naturally unions would like to see fair share fees where it's permissible because it makes sense. But again, in right-to-work states, the fair share agreements, they're illegal. In all states, unions are required by law to represent all workers covered by a collective bargaining agreement, regardless of whether the worker is a member of the union. Okay? So in right-to-work states, unions still have to provide the representation, but workers are not required to pay a fair share fee for the representation. That creates the free rider problem that weakens unions.
And so with that, I mean, that obviously creates, the weakened unions make it makes it more difficult for unions to function. And so with that, we do see that states with right-to-work laws generally have lower rates of unionization.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, the 17 states with the lowest union density rates, they all have right-to-work laws. And so, these low union density states typically have, what else? Lower wages, less robust public benefits. So, it is all connected. It's not a coincidence that right-to-work states have lower rates of unionization, and it's not a coincidence that states with less unions are worse on pretty much any measurement, right? Mm-hmm. For working people, at least. It's worse in terms of wages, and it's worse in terms of the state, the quality of life and the public benefits provided in the state. And so that's what right to work means. It's not about a right to a job. It's not about freedom. It has nothing to do with freedom. It is a tactic by the employer and the government in collusion with one another to weaken unions, to require unions to take care of people who do not have to pay any sort of compensation in exchange. Right. And, nowhere else do employers think that's a good philosophy, that you should get to take a free ride, right? Employers don't like that. At least that's not what they claim, okay? So, in most scenarios in our society, if you receive a benefit, a service of some kind, you have to exchange something, right? You have to provide compensation. You have to provide your own service in exchange, whatever it may be. So it is a very unique situation that unions are subjected to, where they have all the obligations but none of the benefits of these workers who choose not to join. And I'm saying all this not to demonize the workers who choose not to join. That's their choice, of course. It's a choice whether or not you want to join the union. But I think a fair share fee is a totally reasonable thing to negotiate in a contract, and it's totally reasonable that employers and unions should be able to negotiate that in their contracts if they so choose, if that's what's ratified by both sides of the negotiation. It's big government getting in the way of these
Right.
negotiations through right to work. And there's a lot more we could say there about right to work and its racist legacy and the way it's been connected to, white supremacy in the South in particular. Again, it's no coincidence that the South, by and large, is right to work, and the anti-union campaigns of old were very, very racially tinged, to put it mildly. So, there's a lot of connections there between the legacy of racism and right-to-work laws. And one other aspect of this discussion is that right-to-work is often considered something else. Right-to-work and at-will employment are two different concepts. Okay, but a lot of times people will say right to work as if it means the same thing as at-will employment, and it is actually two different things. So at-will employment means an employee can be fired for any legal reason and does not have to be given a reason or a warning. Unions fight for due process, right? We fight against at-will employment, and typically in union contracts, you may have a probationary period, some months, some years, where you work and you are at will during that time, to at least maybe largely at will. You may have some rights in that period, but then you get due process after the probationary period, or you get tenure, maybe if you're a teacher. And all that means is due process. That means you can still be fired, but the employer has to have a good reason for it.
Right.
They have to have just cause. And there are a variety of different things that could get you fired and that are considered to be just cause. Right? So an employee who is always late to work, an employee who's drunk at work, those things, due process aside, if the employer can prove it, okay, they can do what they're allowed to do within the contract, within the rules agreed upon by both sides for employee discipline. So at-will employment is the default.
Right.
It's the default here in the South. It's, it's
the
the
default
law.
everywhere in the country, is my understanding, except for like Montana.
Right. So at-will employment is the default option. That's why unions are so important in the workplace, so that you can move beyond at-will and actually have a little bit of security and know that your boss can't just fire you at a whim, but would actually have to make a case for why you deserve to be fired, would actually have to give you some notification in advance, that there's a process to move through to get rid of you. Because I can tell you, having represented workers in both statuses, it is so much better for the worker that they have due process. The at-will employment is very, very harmful to employees. But I wanted to put that out there because a lot of times people use at-will and right to work as if they're the same thing, and kind of interchange those terms. And, I've heard it plenty of times said, oh, well, yeah, this is Alabama, it's right to work. They can fire you for anything. And you're right. You're half right. They can fire you for anything, but it's not because it's right to work necessarily, though. On a deeper level, yeah, I mean, that's part of it, right? Because we are an anti-union state, we have weak laws to protect workers. So there is some truth to that statement, but that's, typically not what people mean. People are confusing at-will employment with right to work. But at-will employment is very, very, arbitrary. And I have personally, represented workers who were at will and who were, fired for stupid reasons and in some cases for no reason whatsoever. People who were loyal employees, who did a good job, who had great evaluations, who show up to work on a Friday, and next thing you know, security is walking them to their car. All right, and never told why, ever. Never. The only chance they may have to find out why is if they file an EEOC claim, right? Because the law does say any legal reason.
Right.
It's still against the law to discriminate against people. You cannot fire someone because of a protected category in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, right? So an employer is not supposed to fire someone because of their race or their gender or their religion or ethnicity or disability status or age over 40. Those are protected categories, but again, in a at-will employment state, if that's the default, good luck proving that. We may know, like the worker may know they were fired for discriminatory reasons. The union rep may know they're fired for discriminatory reasons. Any common sense person may know someone's fired for discriminatory reasons, but that doesn't mean you can prove it, especially proving it in front of a reactionary judge in a state like Alabama. That is right to work, that is anti-union, and that is anti-worker in its legal framework. So, that's right to work, that's at-will employment.
And, you know, just to spend a bit longer on the hypocrisy of the quote-unquote small government politicians who push right-to-work laws. And we spoke about this actually a couple of weeks ago in regards to the fight between DeSantis and Disney. I mean, Ronald DeSantis is explicitly going after Disney and attempting to increase the size of government and make them pay more taxes and put more red tape on them, and make sure that they have to go through more government approvals before they can begin building and stuff like this. And this is this is all of those things I'm totally fine with. I'm fine, and I think it's bizarre that a corporation has been basically allocated this huge slot of land in Florida that they are able to run as a corporate fiefdom. I think that's bad. I also think it's bad that they don't pay very many taxes to the state of Florida. I think it would be good for the state of Florida to get more taxes from Disney. But the fight there really just goes to show that, you know, there is not actually a principled position on the Republican side of small government. They only have that position when it will hurt working people. So they have that position, for example, when it comes to minimum wage laws. Mm-hmm. If the government wants to mandate a minimum wage that is higher than it already is, some of them don't want there to be a minimum wage at all. Some people are enough of a freak to want that, and some don't want it to increase. And they say that it is that they oppose it because they oppose big government. Other people, or the same people, oppose increasing safety regulations. Because why? They oppose big government. And yet, the same people that oppose increased safety regulations, the same people that oppose increasing the minimum wage, are in favor of the state coming in between the workers and the employer and saying to them, no, you cannot, in a private contract negotiation, agree to both parties. You cannot agree to a fair share clause. You just can't agree. It is illegal to enforce a fair share clause. It is illegal to enforce a representation fee. That is what we as the government are saying to you two private parties, the workers and the employer. And that is definitionally government intervention in the private marketplace.
Right.
And yet, they support it. They support it. And so I say that not to try to convince you that I am, in fact, the principled small government person. I am not a principled small government person. I think that the government ought to be as big as it needs to be to best support the needs of working people.
Sometimes it depends.
Sometimes it depends. Sometimes the state would be better if it were shrunk. Sometimes it would be better if the state were grown. I acknowledge that, but the people on the other side of this argument do not acknowledge that, but their true position is just the opposite of mine. They support a small state when it is beneficial for who? Not the workers, but the businesses, but the bosses, but the elites, the rich
campaign
folks,
donors.
their campaign donors.
Right.
And on the same, the other side of the same coin is that they support a large state. They support the burgeoning of the state, the increased encroachment of the state in our lives, in our negotiations, in the private sector when it benefits their corporate benefactors.
Right.
And that's exactly what right to work is. That is an encroachment of government into private negotiations, which I do not have a principled opposition to. It's just important to understand what it is, because these people will try to obfuscate and not be explicit about what's going on. And so, we think it's important that it's actually important that people know what's going on.
Right,
So.
absolutely. I mean, and there's a lot more to be said there about, right-wing hypocrisy about the size of government. I mean, after all, these are the exact same people who say, yes, government should not be big enough to enact safety regulations to protect you on the job or to raise your wage. The government needs to be small in those situations. Oh, but when the police murder someone, that's okay.
Right.
When we have paramilitary-style forces raiding houses and deporting people in very cruel situations, very cruel conditions, when we have violence enacted by the state, that's okay. The small government arguments never come out from these folks when it's that situation, right? The small government arguments never come into play when we're talking about the surveillance of the country and our population. Right. And there's a lot more you could get into there. But so, yeah, that hypocrisy is worth pointing out in terms of right to work and what the actual definition of the word means. So, right to work just means that fair share fees are banned by big government in your particular state, and it's banned because it is a way to weaken unions, to make unions have to represent people who pay them nothing in exchange, right? If LeBron James decides to drop out of the NBA Players Association today, he can drop out of the union. He doesn't have to be a member of the union. After all, he's probably the richest player in the league. He doesn't have to belong. But guess what? He's still covered by the contract. And if he gets in trouble, he still gets to call them, and they still have to represent him. That was the example I used with high school students, was LeBron. I mean, that's about as visible a union member as I can find. And again, he doesn't have to join the union. That's his choice to join or not to join. But we're saying that it's a reasonable scenario for the union and the employer to negotiate a fair share agreement. It's just unfortunate that, hypocritical right-wingers disagree with that because they fear worker power in the form of collective organization, and they fear the political influence that unions can have as they grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all that out of the way, we've talked about right to work and how it impacts Alabama. I wanted to talk about something else in Alabama from the Department of Justice. And there's a new article that is out by the Associated Press. The AP has put out an article called DOJ, Alabama Ignored Sewer Issues Harmed Black Residents. The U.S. Department of Justice on Thursday said an environmental justice probe found Alabama engaged in a pattern of inaction and neglect regarding the risk of raw sewage for residents in an impoverished Alabama county, and announced a settlement agreement with the state. The federal Departments of Justice and Health and Human Services announced the results of the environmental justice probe and a settlement agreement with state health officials to address long-standing wastewater sanitation problems in Lowndes County, a high-poverty county between Selma and Montgomery. The agreement is the result of the department's first environmental justice investigation under Title VII, or Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division said it will not be the last because, quote, the fight for environmental justice is an urgent one, and the effects of the climate crisis have exacerbated the health risk faced by marginalized communities. For generations, Black rural residents of Lowndes County have lacked access to basic sanitation services. As a result, these residents have been exposed to raw sewage in their neighborhoods, their yards, their playgrounds, schools, and even inside their own homes, Clark said. The Department of Justice did not accuse the state of violating federal civil rights law, but it said it found two areas of concern: the potential use of fines to punish people with inadequate home systems, and what it called inadequate action to assess and address the potential health risk from raw sewage. The Alabama Department of Public Health agreed to a number of changes, including the creation of a comprehensive plan for the region and a moratorium on fines. The federal department agreed to suspend their investigation as long as the state complies with the settlement terms. State Health Officer Scott Harris said Thursday that his department welcomes the agreement, although he disputes the allegation that the problem has been neglected by the state agency. The agreement largely encompasses actions the state was already taking or working toward, he said. Alabama lawmakers agreed to use a portion of the state's pandemic relief funds through the American Rescue Plan for water and sewage projects, with some funds dedicated for high-needs projects. We have been aware of these problems for a long time. They've lasted for generations, Harris said. It's only just now, thanks to the American Rescue Plan funding, that the state has had any ability to begin to address them at all. Wastewater problems are well documented in Lowndes County, a county of about 10,000 people where 72% of residents are black and 28% live in poverty. Before the Civil War, the county was home to cotton plantation owners where wealthy landowners got rich off the labor of enslaved people. The county later became a center of the struggle for voting rights and civil rights in the 1960s. The region is known as the Black Belt because of the dark, rich soil, but the type of soil also makes it difficult for traditional septic tanks, in which wastewater filters through the ground to function properly. The region's intense poverty and inadequate municipal infrastructure contribute to the problem. Maintaining septic tanks have typically been the responsibility of a homeowner, while local governments maintain sewage systems. Some homes in the rural county, where the median household income is about $31,000, still have straight pipe systems, letting sewage run untreated from home to yard. Environmental justice is a public health issue, and where you live should not determine whether you get sick from basic environmental hazards not faced in other affluent and white communities, Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights Director Melanie Fontes Rayner said in a statement. Harris said similar wastewater problems exist in other areas of the state. Ultimately, these are problems on poverty, and we do have poverty in our state, he said. So that was, again, from the Associated Press. The Department of Justice has said that Alabama ignored sewer issues and harmed black residents in the process. I do take issue with the Chief Health Officer, Scott Harris. I do take issue with him saying that, they had never had the ability to take action until now. That only with American Rescue Plan funding has there been, the possibility of doing something about this. And he may be technically correct in terms of his department. That could be true. I can't dispute that. I don't know enough about his budget from year on year to dispute that. But the broader point is that the Alabama political leadership has chosen not to do anything about it for all these years. We have long known about these problems. The United Nations has pointed out these problems and has said publicly that parts of Alabama are living in third world level conditions. Okay, that's not a secret. We've long known about that. Alabama legislators who only have two jobs, which is to pass the general fund budget and to pass the education trust fund budget. They've long known about these issues. So I understand what, Harris is saying there, but I think it's really easy to misinterpret that comment and let these folks off the hook. We absolutely could have done a lot more as a state and could have done it a long time ago. So we'll see how this settlement agreement pans out and, whether or not it actually produces the results that we need to see. But it's long past time that some action be taken down in Lowndes County. It is just, it's disgusting to think that we have so many of our fellow Alabamians that do not have adequate sewage systems in place. It's just really, it's beyond the pale in the year 2023. So, glad to see some action by the Department of Justice. I'm going to withhold my opinion until we can kind of see how this settlement agreement is shaking out and what the state of Alabama is going to do and all the details of the agreement. But definitely wishing much improvement in that area. Also had another update, this time from Washington, D.C., but from the White House instead of the Department of Justice. So we recently brought you a report from the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which was applauding the Biden administration's proclamation of April as Care Workers Recognition Month. Well, the White House has followed up with this symbolic move with a new executive order that is garnering praise from the NDWA, who released the following statement. National Domestic Workers Alliance statement on the Biden-Harris administration's historic executive actions to improve care affordability and care jobs. On April 18th, the Biden-Harris administration announced the most comprehensive set of executive actions to improve care in the history of the United States. President Joe Biden signed the order at an event with family caregivers, people with disabilities, older adults, and early childhood and long-term care workers, including workers who are members of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. This order includes more than 50 directives to federal agencies to utilize existing funding to expand access to quality, affordable care and provide support to family caregivers and care workers, including domestic workers. Asian Pu, president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and Jen Stowe, executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, released the following statement in response. Quote, "This is a tremendous milestone for families and workers across the country. This unprecedented slate of executive actions represents the most comprehensive set of actions any president has ever taken to improve the care infrastructure and support families and care workers. We applaud the Biden-Harris administration's historic commitment to addressing the growing demand for affordable, high-quality care services for our loved ones, while ensuring care workers are afforded the protections, wages, and dignity they deserve on the job. This could not have come at a more critical time. As the care workforce crisis intensifies across the country and families continue to struggle to afford care, this set of executive actions marks the all-in commitment we need to make sure care jobs are good jobs and that Americans can access care for generations to come. It is a major step forward toward modernizing our care system. These executive actions recognize the critical importance of care work, including paid and unpaid responsibilities such as child care, elder care, and disability care. It acknowledges the challenges care workers face, who are often undervalued and underpaid, and aims to improve their wages, benefits, and working conditions. The order also focuses on expanding affordable access to care services, particularly for low-income communities, promoting continued innovation and collaboration in the care sector. It recognizes that care work is essential to the economy and that investment in this sector can lead to job creation and economic growth. The magnitude of these investments cannot be overstated. The administration is leading us to the once-in-a-generation investments needed to improve the lives of millions and toward building a more equitable and sustainable care infrastructure in this country. It's our hope that today's promise is inspiration for our country's decision-makers and leaders to prioritize care in all they do. Our families, our jobs, and our future depend on bold actions like today's executive order, and care is a need that we can no longer overlook. We look forward to continuing our efforts alongside the White House and all of our nation's leaders toward ensuring that every person in this country has access to affordable care and that every care worker receives the dignity and respect they deeply deserve. In an unprecedented show of unity of workers, families, consumers of care, and leaders across the care economy, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, SEIU, AFL-CIO, AFT, AFSCME, Community Change, Moms Rising, Care in Action, Care Can't Wait, and a number of the care movement's congressional champions gathered in Washington, D.C. for the Care Workers Can't Wait Summit on April 18th and 19th to celebrate this announcement and chart the way forward. The announcement also comes on the heels of the White House proclamation designating the month of April as Care Workers Recognition Month. This recognition is particularly meaningful in light of a long history of exclusion of some workers from basic protection in our nation's labor laws. And so the National Domestic Workers Alliance is the leading voice for dignity and fairness for millions of domestic workers in the United States. They were founded back in 2007. They work for respect, recognition, and inclusion in labor protections for domestic workers, the majority of whom are immigrants and women of color. NDWA is powered by over 70 affiliate organizations and local chapters and by a growing membership base of nannies, house cleaners, and care workers in over 20 states. So that's the NDWA statement on this new executive order out from Joe Biden and the White House. Certainly sounds very positive based on their statement. I have not had a chance to really dig into it and see, if it lives up to these lofty words. I know when I talked about it earlier in terms of Joe Biden and the administration making this April Care Worker Recognition Month. It's a nice symbol, but it is just a symbol, right? Getting a special proclamation or getting a special recognition month doesn't pay the bills, right? It's Teacher Appreciation Week, right? And getting candy and, balloons or whatever on Teacher Appreciation Week doesn't make those teachers' class sizes any smaller. It doesn't guarantee them collective bargaining rights. And so same with, declaring a recognition month. It's easy for that to be an empty gesture. So I will say I am happy to see that this gesture was followed up by some action. Obviously, it would be preferable if Congress were taking action, but we know Congress is incredibly dysfunctional and basically nothing is going to pass, at least nothing positive. It doesn't appear. So, in the short term, or in the absence of congressional action being realistic right now, some executive orders may be, the best we can hope for in certain areas of policy. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. But I did want to bring that update from the National Domestic Workers Alliance about this new executive order that is at least supposed to support domestic care workers in this country. My next story, unfortunately, is about child labor. We have discussed child labor quite a bit on this program, and that's because it keeps happening a lot across the South and across this country. It's a shame, really. I think the labor movement felt like we won on this issue about a century ago, and yet here we are with child labor running rampant across the country. And it's pretty regular that we get these press releases from the U.S. Department of Labor where they have busted more employers for illegally employing children. Today's story of bosses behaving badly, this would be 3 McDonald's franchisees in Kentucky who were paying $212,000 in fines after federal investigations fined 305 minors, including 10-year-olds, working illegally. The Louisville area franchisees employed minors to work longer than law permits. According to the press release from the Department of Labor, working in a kitchen late at night near dangerous cooking equipment is a reality for many adults in the food service industry. But finding 10-year-old kids in such a work environment is a cause for concern and action by the U.S. Department of Labor. Investigators from the department's Wage and Hour Division found 2 10-year-old workers at Louisville McDonald's restaurant among many violations of federal labor laws committed by 3 Kentucky McDonald's franchise operators. The investigations are part of the division's ongoing effort to stop child labor abuses in the Southeast region. The division investigated Bauer Food LLC, Archways Richwood LLC, and Bell Restaurant Group, LLC, 3 separate franchisees that operate a total of 62 McDonald's locations across Kentucky, Indiana, Maryland, and Ohio, and found they employed 305 children to work more than the legally permitted hours and perform tasks prohibited by law for young workers. In all, the investigations led to assessments of $212,544 in civil money penalties against the employers. Too often, employers fail to follow the child labor laws that protect young workers, explained Wage and Hour Division District Director Karen Garnett Civils in Louisville, Kentucky. Under no circumstances should there ever be a 10-year-old child working in a fast food kitchen around hot grills, ovens, and deep fryers. The division's investigations found the following. Bauer Food LLC, a Louisville-based operator of 10 McDonald's locations, employed 24 minors under age 16 to work more than legally permitted hours. These children sometimes worked more hours a day or week than the law permits, whether or not school is in session. Investigators also determined 2 10-year-old children were employed, but not paid, and sometimes worked as late as 2 a.m. Below the minimum age for employment, they prepared and distributed food orders, cleaned the store, worked at the drive-thru window, and operated a register. The division also learned that one of the 2 children was allowed to operate a deep fryer, a prohibited task for workers under 16 years old. The division assessed $39,711 in civil money penalties to address these child labor violations. Wow. 10 years old. Archways Richwood LLC, a Walton-based operator of 27 McDonald's locations, allowed 242 minors between age 14 and 15 to work beyond the allowable hours. Most worked earlier or later in the day than the law permits and more than 3 hours on school days. The division assessed the employer with $143,566 in civil money penalties for their violations. Bell Restaurant Group 1, LLC, is a Louisville-based operator of 4 McDonald's locations and part of Beard & Cat Management, Inc., a larger enterprise that includes Jesse Bell 1, Jesse Bell 5, and Bell Restaurant Group 2, which operates an additional 20 locations in Maryland, Indiana, and Kentucky. The division found the employer allowed 39 workers, ages 14 and 15, to work outside of and for more hours than the law permits. Some of these children worked more than the daily and weekly limits during school days and school weeks, and the employer allowed 2 of them to work during school hours. To address the child labor violations, the division assessed the employer $29,267 in civil money penalties. Investigators also found the employer systemically failed to pay workers overtime wages they were due, and as a result, the division recovered $14,730 in back wages and liquidated damages for 58 workers. Wow. Imagine that. An employer who is illegally violating child labor laws is also violating overtime laws. And yet, $29,267 is what they paid in civil money penalties for their violations of child labor law. Not sure if they had to pay any fines for their violations of overtime. Again, it says the division recovered $14,730 in back wages and liquidated damages for 58 workers. Federal child labor regulations limit the types of jobs minor-aged employees can perform and the hours they could work. Hour limits for 14 and 15-year-olds include work must be performed outside of school hours, no more than 3 hours on a school day, including Fridays, and no more than 8 hours on a non-school day. No more than 18 hours during a school week and no more than 40 hours during a non-school week. No earlier than 7 a.m. and no later than 7 p.m. except between June 1st and Labor Day, when the evening hour is extended to 9 p.m. We are seeing an increase in federal child labor violations, including allowing minors to operate equipment or handle types of work that endangers them or employs them for more hours or later in the day than federal law allows, said Garnett Civils. An employer who hires young workers must know the rules. An employer, parent, or young worker with questions can contact us for help understanding their obligations and rights under the law. While most cases with child labor violations involve minors working more or later than the law permits, the division found 688 minors employed illegally in hazardous occupations in fiscal year 2022, the highest annual count since fiscal year 2011. Among those was a 15-year-old minor injured while using a deep fryer at a McDonald's in Morristown, Tennessee in June 2022. One child injured at work is one too many. Child labor laws exist to ensure that when young people work, the job does not jeopardize their health, well-being, or education, added Garnett Civils. The Wage and Hour Division offers multiple tools to help employers understand their responsibilities and offers confidential compliance assistance to anyone with questions about how to comply with the law by calling the agency's toll-free helpline at 866-4US-WAGE. That's 487-9243. The department can speak with callers in more than 200 languages. The division also recently published 7 child labor best practices for employers. So, more child labor violations happening right here in the South. Truly a shame. And while I appreciate these folks at the Department of Labor for their investigations and for their fines and for the uncovering this and taking action, I don't think I'm the only one who reads these numbers and reads these penalties and thinks that is far too little. Particularly when we have human beings being thrown in cages for all sorts of crimes across our country and across our state, and yet we have employers who can routinely violate the law with a slap on the wrist. So, more child labor, folks. We've got to beat it back. We've already done it once. We've got to do it again. We have to protect the kids. We have to protect the kids. It's funny, or not so funny perhaps, that many of the same right-wingers who are obsessively calling people groomers and accusing folks of grooming children for nefarious purposes also tend to be the exact same people who are cool with illegally employing children. Just a little coincidence. So I want to stick with the South here and talk about a new union that is rising here in the South. And I want to point you to Kim Kelly, our dear friend, writer, radical organizer Kim Kelly. She writes an op-ed column for Teen Vogue called No Class. And in that column, she connects worker struggles and the current state of the American labor movement with its storied and sometimes bloodied past. And this article is actually a little bit older. It came out back towards the end of March 20th. And it's something that we haven't talked about on the show, so I wanted to make sure we did talk about it this weekend for a couple of reasons. One is because, well, Kim is a great writer, so it's a great article. You'll enjoy reading it. But more importantly, the subject matter. We have a new union effort among service workers here in the South. And if ever there was an industry that needed to be unionized and in a region that needed to be unionized, it's service workers in the Southeast. So the Union of Southern Service Workers is organizing low-wage workers across industries. And again, this is Kim Kelly's column back in March in Teen Vogue. I'm going to quote just a little bit from this article to give you a flavor of the article. And I will tell you that we are reaching out to folks from the USSW, the Union of Southern Service Workers. So we're going to be reaching out to them and hopefully have some of them on the show very soon, because we would definitely love to highlight their efforts and lift up their efforts and appreciate what they're doing. So just to quote a bit from Kim, quote, "If you truly want to understand the history of organized labor in this country, you must look to the South. Specifically to what black workers and other workers of color have accomplished there despite every conceivable obstacle. Nowadays, states such as Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and North Carolina are home to anti-union right-to-work legislation that makes it extremely difficult for workers to organize. Corporate-friendly politicians have actively worked to disenfranchise and oppress poor and working-class people, especially the most marginalized. A century ago, things weren't much different, but like today, those workers fought back. They protested, picketed, formed unions, and went on strike. Many of them were considered unorganizable by labor leadership and labor opponents alike, a status pinned to various groups of workers, typically casual, low-income workers of color, recent immigrants, or both, throughout the centuries. In 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, a landmark labor law that gave most workers the legal right to organize, bargain, and strike, was passed, it included several glaring omissions. By excluding domestic workers and agricultural workers, many of whom were black, particularly in the South, the NLRA made it clear that for all its New Deal-era progressivism, the politicians who passed it had decided that some workers simply weren't worth fighting for. Fortunately, those workers took matters into their own hands and organized anyway. From the communist tenant farmers in Alabama, described in historian Robin D.G. Kelly's classic Hammer and Hoe, to Dorothy Lee Bolden and the National Domestic Workers Union of America in Atlanta. Now, the Union of Southern Service Workers, USSW, is determined to follow in their footsteps by organizing today's unorganizable Southern workers. And so the union was co-founded by over 150 retail, fast food, restaurant, and care workers who live and work throughout the South. USSW went public in November, but it has been built on a decade of prior organizing work by Raise Up the South, the southern branch of the Fight for 15 and a Union campaign, and backed by the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU. Staff organizers provide support when desired, but the new union is an entirely worker-led effort and did not bother filing for recognition from the National Labor Relations Board before going public. As far as USSW is concerned, a union is a group of workers organizing collectively, and that is exactly who they are. The Ignite Committee, a group of workers from different jobs in different states who are deeply involved with Raise Up, helped create the vision for the new union, 25-year-old Jamila Allen tells Teen Vogue. She is a founding member of USSW, has been involved with the Rise Up since 2018, and currently works at the Durham, North Carolina location of local fast food chain Freddy's Frozen Custard and Steak Burgers. Our goal for our union is to get our voices on the job and make sure workers are heard. A real voice on the job means that we would have the power to discuss with the bosses and negotiate terms about things like pay raises, health insurance, and safety conditions. And so Kim goes on to describe some of the brave sisters and brothers who are involved in the USSW. It is a multiracial and anti-racist organization, and really it harkens back to a long history of workers organizing interracially here in the South, trying to build interracial people power. And so wanted to lift up that article by Kim Kelly. Again, came out in March in Teen Vogue, in case you missed it. We look forward to hopefully talking to some folks from the Union of Southern Service Workers. We met some of these folks through Raise Up the South at the Troublemaker School back in October. That was here in Alabama. So really cool folks, really proud of what they're doing and really appreciate what they're doing, trying to organize in the service industry here in the South. So if you are in the service industry and you're in the South, the Union of Southern Service Workers is looking for you. Reach out to them. It may be worth you having a conversation. Even if you think a union is not necessarily in the cards right now for your store, your particular, work site, maybe you think it's not possible, just reach out to them anyway. Just reach out to them. It can't hurt to at least have a conversation and get connected with this new union effort. So really appreciate what they're doing, sending all my love and solidarity to the Union of Southern Service Workers. And I wanted to close Overtime today with a very brief mention of some of what's been happening with the Alabama Democratic Party. So the Alabama Democrats held their big state meeting this past weekend, May 6th. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend an article by Allender Roca from the Alabama Reflector. And we actually republished that article on TVLR.fm. You can check it out there. You can check it out on the AlabamaReflector.com. It was a great article titled Alabama Democrats Eliminate Youth, LGBTQ+, Disabled Caucuses at Contentious Meeting. And so a little bit about the Alabama Reflector. First of all, it's part of State Newsroom, a network of news bureaus supported by grants and a coalition of donors as a 501c3 public charity. Alabama Reflector maintains editorial independence. Contact editor Brian Lyman for questions at info@alabamareflector.com, and you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter. They allow republishing and reposting with permission under a Creative Commons agreement. And so really appreciate that they have that spirit of collaboration, and we have been in touch with them and have talked back and forth. We've republished a couple of their articles. Really good stuff happening there at the Alabama Reflector. Definitely used to read Brian Lyman's work for the Montgomery Advertiser. He was one of the key people to follow on Twitter if you wanted to track Alabama politics, especially in the legislative session. So, yeah, really impressed with their new outfit, and definitely want to highlight this particular article because it was the best one I saw in terms of covering what happened this past Saturday at the Alabama Democratic Party's meeting. So the long and short of it is, as we've talked to you on the show before, there is factional disputes in the party, right? And the Joe Reed caucus, the Joe Reed faction, primarily the Alabama Democratic Conference, ADC, of which Joe Reed is the head, they have gained power back after a brief interlude where they were out of power. A few years ago, the DNC stepped in, Doug Jones got involved, new bylaws were passed or implemented that were signed off on by the DNC. It expanded certain caucuses, it changed some of the rules, and the Joe Reed and ADC faction was upset by that. Joe Reed and his ally, Randy Kelly, who is the chair of the party, they believe that it diluted their influence in terms of black political representation inside the party. So there's been fighting back and forth ever since these bylaws were, since before the bylaws. But the bylaws themselves have been a point of contention since they were implemented. And we've seen some hinting at this since Randy Kelly became the chair of the party and, the Reed faction regained power. We've seen them sort of hint at undoing these bylaws, and that's exactly what they did. So they approved new bylaws on Saturday that eliminated the Youth Caucus, the LGBTQ plus caucus, and the Disabled Caucus. They also reduced the power of other caucuses, such as the Native American Caucus, the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus. They even changed the rule in terms of labor representation. A seat that used to be reserved for the AFL-CIO is now no longer reserved for the AFL-CIO. And so there were quite a bit of changes. There was also controversy as to whether or not these were even legal moves because, for one thing, and photographic evidence tends to back this up, there was accusations that the vote was simply inaccurate, that the yes votes for the new bylaws were not as many as the no votes. And again, if you check the photographs on the Alabama Reflector article, you'll see what I'm saying. There's certainly reasons to be questioned, asking questions about it, certainly. And there was also the issue of this quote-unquote poll tax, or at least that's how it was described by Tabitha Eisner, who's the vice chair of the party. People showed up to the meeting and were told they couldn't vote. They couldn't participate in the meeting. They asked why, and they said, well, you owe $50. And folks were not aware of the $50 fee. That was news to them. And folks said, okay, well, let me pay you $50. Let me personally hand you $50. Now, can I get my credentials? Can I go on the floor and vote? And they said no. So there were delegates to the State Democratic Executive Committee who were disenfranchised, or at least that's what they're reporting. And, this is definitely a long-running feud. But I got to say, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because complaints have already been filed with the DNC, and there's, threats of possible litigation over this. So the ongoing saga of infighting in the Alabama Democratic Party definitely continues. And I'm working on an article this week to get activist reactions to this meeting and and sort of just check the pulse of what activists on the ground across the state are thinking about the Alabama Democratic Party right now. I've gotten some really interesting responses and great responses, so stay tuned for that. Should be coming out any day now. So, we'll have more to say on this probably next week, especially as those articles come out. But, I wanted to mention it because it is big news in Alabama politics. It is definitely had progressive Alabamian social media all abuzz on Twitter and Facebook and things like that. There's been a lot said about it. My own commentary, I point you to my series on Alabama political engagement on TVLR.fm, which has gotten a little bit of conversation going, I know. Some people not so happy with it. Some people felt like it really resonated with them. But, to give you kind of a glimpse of what I discussed in those pieces, I had discussed previously on the show a few months back after the election and, the realities of the fact that only about 4 in 10 Alabamians voted are the realities that I had more libertarians on my ballot than Democrats. I had more unopposed Republicans on my ballot than Democrats. And then we look at the realities that you have people who are unrepresented currently in Alabama politics, right? 75,000 people voted for Bernie Sanders in this state 2 different times. They have no voice in Alabama politics. There's about 150,000 union members in the state of Alabama, but you wouldn't know that listening to Alabama politicians, right? The Alabama political class has no interest in labor, and we've seen, mostly silence from the Alabama Democratic Party when it comes to some of these really historic labor struggles happening right here in the state of Alabama. So definitely check out those articles on Alabama political engagement, again, on TVLR.fm. We're going to be speaking to more and more activists about this situation and how they feel about it. But certainly the initial reactions I'm getting is that a lot of progressive activists are very, not necessarily surprised, but disappointed by these recent moves, and they feel disenfranchised by these recent moves, and they feel as if the party doesn't want them. And so, to Dr. Joe Reed, to Randy Kelly, you have a lot of work to do to convince people to be part of your coalition. Because ultimately that is your job, right? To win votes, to win political support. And so seems like you got your work cut out for you, because there's a lack of trust and there is, certainly a lot of hard feelings right now. And I just got to say that for my entire adult lifetime, the Alabama Democratic Party has not been relevant or competitive or viable or functional in any sort of meaningful way. We're talking, over a decade here of incompetence, of being demolished in the election results, of a lack of media presence, a lack of social media presence, a lack of media and social media strategy, a lack of a political program that's being advanced, a lack of training and organizing of supporters. You name it. Communications, just basic communications, regular emails, right? Even these fundamental things haven't been happening. And so we'll see. Stay tuned to that story. It's definitely a developing story. But as a working class activist, as a labor activist, for me, it's just frustrating because the working class people of Alabama deserve political representation. We deserve better than what we have. And right now, we don't have folks in the political class that are fighting for us. Now, you have some legislators that are doing better than others, obviously. You have some legislators that are doing good work, and I don't want to diminish the work they're doing. But let's be honest here. The Alabama GOP has a supermajority. They control all levers of government in the state, from the local on up. the judicial, the executive, the legislative branches. They have long dominated it. And right now, there's not viable opposition to the far right. And so it's going to be up to us to organize true interracial people power that can oppose some of this reactionary garbage that is coming from the political class and start to actually improve the lives of everyday, working class people in Alabama, because we are the majority. We are the majority. Working people, we are the biggest group in the state, and it's time we acted like it. So, with all that, we're going to wrap things up on Overtime this afternoon. Reminder that we also air on Unclaimed Mysteries Radio, which is a Huntsville-based internet radio station. You can listen on Live 365. Just search Unclaimed Mysteries Radio. Again, stay tuned to TVLR.fm, where we've got some original commentary and news coming out. Check out Jacob's article within these times called An Explosion, Layoffs, and the End of Paper in J. As they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings that includes their May Stewards Workshop on Just Cause with the great labor lawyer Bob Schwartz. So definitely check that out at labornotes.org. The Alabama International Fringe Festival is a 3-day event taking place on May 12th, 13th, and 14th in the River region of Alabama, centered in Montgomery. That includes a performance of Toll Puddle the Musical, a musical about Union struggles in 1800s England. Check out our interview with the director and one of the lead actors that we did last week. Don't forget our new weekly series called Shop Talk, airing online on Thursday mornings. Shop Talk is dedicated to labor education, history, and training. You can check out the live streams on Thursday mornings at 9:30 a.m. Central Time, or the podcast a few days later. We had a great episode of Shop Talk this week with a sister from Revolutions Per Minute podcast radio show who has been actively involved in the Trader Joe union campaign. And she talked about basically how to respond when you lose. And for better or worse, we're going to lose sometimes, right? We're going to lose sometimes as working people. We don't win all the fights that we fight. We face a lot of uphill battles, and she talked a little bit about that and how we should respond when we lose. So it was a great episode, great discussion. Check it out if you missed it. And if you're not on our email list at tvlr.fm, definitely sign up for that so you can stay up to date. Feel free to leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. Don't forget, you can donate or buy our merch at tvlr.fm. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to the Valley Labor Report. So, with all that said, really appreciate y'all tuning in today. Sorry again for the strange episode that may be a little jumbled up, but hopefully you still found value in it. So thanks for listening. All power to the working class.